Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to all my blessed beloveds out there in video land. You're watching Living and Thriving with Rusty, and I'm Rusty. This is a place where your happiness matters. Today's guest is going to share with us what makes her tick, what makes her ooey gooey on the inside. Erika will be joining us in just 1 minute. But I want to remind you that if you look down below or around or however I figure out how to do this, you're going to find all kinds of links. My Patreon channel that I'm working on now, which is subscription only. My doTERRA link, which I love. I've got my rosemary right here, always have my rosemary. And all of the other fun things that I'm doing, as well as links to our guests. It's really important if you have interest in the guests to follow through, click on their link, save their link for a later date, or connect with them because they're great people doing great work, and that's why they're here on Living and Thriving. It's an honor, actually, to be doing this. I'm so excited. So today's guest is Erika Schlick, and she's going to tell us what makes her ooey gooey on the inside. And I can tell you, she just busted me eating a little bit of lunch, which will last me until 5 p.m. tonight because I've got 7 more people to go through today. It's crazy. How are you doing, Erika?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Living the dream, living the dream. I live on the west coast of Florida, so it's perpetual sunshine, rainbows, and Jurassic Park. If you are grumpy here, you need to move back to a different state.
I live in LA where it's also perpetual sunlight, so
yeah, you get it. You live in the concrete kingdom.
Yeah, I need it. I need the sun.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk to us about the Wandering Palate.
Yes, that's right. So yeah, that's my cookbook.
Oh, wow. That's right. I forgot. Sorry, I have 165 people that I'm doing, and some of you merged. You're doing paleo as well. Oh, do dish. That's literally.
Right. Absolutely. So my blog started about in 2015, and I got Lyme disease in 2012. And that's what really kind of kickstarted my journey and kickstarted me into eating the way I do today. And before I found out I had Lyme disease, it took about 2 years to get diagnosed. Diet was one of the first things that I changed. I was diagnosed with celiac disease. I had over 60 food allergies. So I really dove into understanding how food affects our bodies, how food was causing different symptoms, and how changing certain foods that I ate could really alleviate some of those issues that I was having. And that's where I came to find the Autoimmune Paleo diet, which is a much stricter version of paleo, but really kind of dives into finding what foods cause inflammation, taking those out of your body and letting your body kind of let you know what foods work, what don't. And as I healed, fortunately, I was able to get stem cell therapy in 2016, and that got me into remission from Lyme disease. And I've been in remission since, but I still eat this way. Eating this way just makes my body feel so good. It keeps my inflammation down. It keeps me energized. And once I recovered, I was able to write my first cookbook, The Wandering Palate. And the book is really kind of a celebration that you can recover from chronic illness. You can do great things. A lot of the recipes in it are travel inspired. I used to do a lot of traveling before I got sick, and I could eat whatever I wanted when I traveled. And now, being celiac and having Lyme disease, which is in remission but not cured, so I definitely need to make sure I am staying on top of my health. Eating this way is kind of non-negotiable at this point. So I wanted my cookbook to be a way to recreate a lot of those amazing flavors and dishes I had around the world that I could no longer eat, but have them in a clean and safe and healthy version that's going to be nutrient dense and still allow you to enjoy those recipes. So that's kind of how it was born. When I wrote my cookbook, I also started adding a lot of gluten-free and paleo recipes to my blog as well that are free up on there. And also before COVID, I had like one good year where I could start traveling again. I was starting to do a lot of gluten-free travel guides. And the idea is to show people that even though you have a chronic illness or are on a restricted diet, you can still travel, you can eat delicious food. There's places that will cater to you, and kind of paving the path for people to be able to do that as well.
Well, I have to tell you, I'm really excited because I too am celiac.
Mm.
And I too love
this is
travel.
Perfect. You're going to love my recipes then.
Yes, I'm going to have to delve into your blog.
Yes.
So fun fact about those of us who love to travel, I find it much easier to travel in Europe as a celiac than I do in the United States. It's almost like you're blasphemous in the United States if you have celiac disease. It's
Yes.
really quite an extraordinary caustic relationship with some of these restaurants.
It is. And, you know, some of them, I feel like in the US, there's a little bit of a fad diet with gluten-free, which has really caused a lot of issues for those of us that are celiac or are truly sensitive, because, you know, I'm very sensitive to cross-contamination. And there's definitely some amazing restaurants out there that do cater, but it's definitely difficult to do it. And I agree, you know, Italy has actually been one of the easiest countries to travel to as a celiac, which you think would be completely off limits, but they're so aware of it, so much understanding, and they really know how to handle it and deal with it. And I ate like a queen there. It was awesome.
I find it's really intriguing here in Florida. We are lovingly known as God's waiting room. And so with the average age being 75, most are on medications and have arthritis and inflammatory things going on, not necessarily autoimmune, but you know what I'm getting to. And a lot of the restaurants here in the area that I live in, Italian restaurants, and it's bittersweet. They offer gluten-free, but they boil it in the wheat pasta water. And I scratch my head going, how's that even logical? Like, it's no longer gluten-free. You've just put it with the gluten that you're trying to sell, you know. So it's that kind of stuff that I find interesting, because again, in Europe and France and Italy and Greece, no issues whatsoever. You don't have to worry about that. But here, it almost seems like an obstinate fight with a 3-year-old.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it. It's definitely challenging.
Yeah. So what is your take as somebody who also loves travel and loves food, and yet you have to change things as you go? What is your take on that? Like,
you know, I think it's important to do a lot of research before you go somewhere. Try to find some restaurants, reach out to restaurants. I think that's really helpful to kind of ease that stress of it before you go, because if you get there and you're hungry, you're going to make compromising decisions, and then you're going to get sick and, you know, not enjoy your travel. So as a celiac, I think it's important to do a lot of research ahead of time. You know, find restaurants that have most of the items on the menu might be gluten-free to begin with, because there's going to be less chance of getting sick that way. I do find that in a lot of major cities here in the US, there are a lot of dedicated gluten-free restaurants. So that is always amazing. I use an app called Find Me Gluten-Free to kind of start to chip away and see what are the safer places to eat at. And then, you know, trying to find like other guides or other bloggers maybe that have visited places, I think is like a good way to start. And then, yeah, you know, I mean, you just have to, if you don't feel safe or you're not finding restaurants that are safe, I always recommend maybe renting something with a kitchen and making your own food. And then that way you can enjoy your trip, you can enjoy the sightseeing that you're there for, but you don't have to worry about dealing with any sickness while you're on your trip.
Yeah, and a lot of us, when we get sick, it's not a pretty sight, and there's no pill, there's
nothing that helps
or anything that helps that system from. Yeah, no, it's ugly, it's miserable, and you don't want to spend the money on a trip to end up spending the whole trip miserable.
Exactly.
So I'm a camper. I love camping. I love going out into the woods. So I'm pretty good with navigating like the deli sections and things like that when I'm traveling. What are the kinds of things that you would recommend for overseas traveling through airports? Because I find that's a big struggle. I mean, I was in the Fort Myers airport a couple of weeks ago, and I asked the gentleman if they had anything gluten-free, and he was like, "No, why?" Just like that. And I'm like, we're good.
Why?
Later.
So awful. Yeah, I mean, airports have definitely come a long way, even in the time that I've been celiac. You know, in some of the stores now, you can find gluten-free snacks and things like that, but I pretty much, when you go to an airport, assume you're not going to be able to eat anything at the airport, especially any of the restaurants. So I have a couple of blogs on my blog actually that kind of talk about either, what gluten-free snacks I bring when I travel. Sometimes I have like an entire small suitcase or bag just full of like food and snacks to take on my trip, which is just crazy. And then also, for long distance travel, like overseas or going to Europe, I have kind of like a whole little meal plan that I do. Usually what I'll do is I'll make food for the entire flight. And as long as you eat it before you land, you don't have any issues with customs or bringing the food in. But kind of like, for lunch, I'll either do kind of like a shredded meat. I have like this thermos that I have that keeps your food warm for quite a bit, or make like a sandwich or something. And then before landing or for dinner, I do kind of like a little picnic. I'll bring some like ham or deli meats and like cheese and olives, have a glass of wine on the plane with it, take a nap afterwards.
You're my girl.
So it's like, as long as you eat all that stuff before you land, you're good to go. And then you're fed. And then, for breakfast, have some coffee or tea, and then like a bar, some kind of like gluten-free bar, something like that, just to get something in your stomach before you land and get to your hotel and all that. So that's kind of my trick that I've learned for the long distance travel.
So talk to me about paleo on top of gluten-free. Is that kind of like keto and gluten-free? I don't eat pork or beef, but I've always been curious about paleo, because I don't think I could do paleo, because don't you have to eat with the seasons and you have to eat game and stuff like that?
Not necessarily. You do have to eat a lot of meat, so it is kind of a high protein diet, but you do eat a ton of vegetables as well. So a paleo diet is kind of taking another level on the gluten-free diet and cutting out grains. Grains are very inflammatory, especially for me. On a gluten-free diet, you can eat them. Paleo, you shouldn't. Legumes also. Legumes and like rice are a little bit of a gray area if it's, properly soaked, and makes it a little easier to digest. If you tolerate them, you can incorporate some of that. It's being really conscious of like your fats and oils, trying to use healthy fats, not seed-based oils, and really just trying to eat as many whole foods as possible instead of eating things in packages, cutting out sugar, cutting out inflammatory oils, filler ingredients, things like that. A keto diet is a little bit different. There's a couple of different spectrums of keto too. Keto is no carbs at all, trying to do extremely high fat. So instead of protein is a bigger item on a paleo diet, fat is a bigger calorie source on a keto diet. And with keto, there's clean keto, which is kind of like a paleo version of keto, where you're trying to eat wild fish and like grass-fed meats, higher quality ingredients. And then they call it dirty keto, when it's like you're just looking at food for its fat content, but you don't care where that fat comes from or the quality of the fat, which is really important, because if you're eating, lower quality fats, those are inflammatory. If you're eating a lot of seed-based oils, those are very inflammatory, high in omega-6. So if you're going to do keto, you definitely want to go on the clean keto route and be very conscious of what you're sourcing your ingredients and calories from.
Very cool. So give me a dish that is pretty typical to a gluten-free paleo meal.
So my typical day is I'll do a grass-fed meat for lunch, or a wild fish. I'll do a big side of veggies or a salad, use some healthy olive oil, things like that. I'll cook some fish maybe with a little bit of grass-fed butter. Dairy is kind of a gray area on paleo, but butter is like mostly fat. Ghee is even better because you've taken out the casein. So I do tolerate dairy okay, so I do include that. And then for dinner, I'll probably do the same. And on occasion, I might add in a little bit of a carb. I might do some sweet potato or cassava, or a little bit of rice if I feel like I need a little bit of carb in my life. But it's pretty clean. And then in the mornings, I usually either do eggs for breakfast. Sometimes I have some bacon for breakfast, or some like meat patties or things like that. I thrive really well on high protein, high fat. So the more of that calorie I get, the longer I can go without eating. I used to be super hypoglycemic, like every 2 hours be like spacey and tired. And once I just started doing more protein and higher fat, I was like, wow, I can go 5-6 hours and not even think about food and still have a lot of energy. So getting the high quality calories and ingredients, I think really makes a difference.
Now I'm a nutaholic. So I'm not allowed to have nuts on paleo?
You can. Yeah, no, okay. You can. Yeah, you can definitely have nuts on paleo.
Okay, good. You scared me there for a second with all the nutty oils.
Nuts and seeds are okay, yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm a huge nut and seed. I think I'm a squirrel, like maybe my inner child, the dodging funny. Squirrel. I don't know. So where do we find more information about you?
Absolutely. You can head over to my website. It's thetrailtohealth.com, and my cookbook, my blog, my recipes, and gluten-free travel guides are all there. You can order my book from my site, or you can also find it on Amazon as well.
Yay. So talk to me about Lyme disease. And I think I'm a little older than you, but my first tick was Homestead, Florida. I think I was in preschool and they had to dig it out of the back of my neck.
Ugh.
That was a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
I moved to Vermont for college, and one of my classmates was actually one of the first people to have suffered from Lyme disease. But I always assumed, I don't know, I always assumed it was kind of a New England problem. No. So how did you get Lyme disease in Concrete Kingdom?
I got it in Yosemite. I've only gone camping 3 times in my life. I'm a total city person, you can probably know by living in this concrete jungle I live in. And yeah, I didn't know anything about Lyme disease either. And I also was very naive and thought it was just an East Coast disease. And, in the Northeast that you don't have to worry about it, but California is just as bad as the Northeast. And you can find Lyme everywhere in the world except for Antarctica. It's even in Hawaii, it's in all 50 states. And it's a huge epidemic. There's so many people that, you're lucky that you saw the tick and removed it and hopefully didn't have any issues after that. But there's so many people that don't even know they got bitten by a tick, myself included. It took 2 years to figure out that that's what was causing my problems. And I feel like there's a big issue with misdiagnosis too. People that, either have autoimmune disease, celiac, Hashimoto's, rheumatoid arthritis, MS, fibromyalgia, Alzheimer's, ALS, Parkinson's. These are all potentially the root cause could be Lyme disease on these conditions. And there's a couple of things that cause a lot of issues with that. First of all, doctors aren't very well trained to know how to diagnose it or to even test for those things is the first issue. Second one is testing is extremely inaccurate. And unless you use some of these more private labs that have more specialized testing and actually look at the right markers, you miss a lot of tests or a lot of cases. And the ELISA test is kind of your Quest or LabCorp test. It misses over 50% of positive Lyme cases. So we've got this huge epidemic going on, and people aren't being tested for it properly. People don't know they got bitten by a tick, and all of a sudden you have these symptoms that kind of come and go, or they look like an autoimmune condition but no one can quite put their finger on it. So this is a huge problem, and regionally there's different diseases that are more prevalent. So there's different strains of Lyme. In California, we have a really big problem with relapsing tick-borne fever, which is another disease that looks like Lyme, but a Lyme test is going to miss it. So, it's like, well, we think you have Lyme, but you're negative. They're not using the right test, but they're not testing for this other disease that's just as debilitating. And, in Texas, you've got the Lone Star tick, which the alpha-gal allergy is very prominent there, and it makes you completely allergic to red meat. Some people can't even be around it cooking. Just the smoke will put them into an anaphylactic reaction.
Yeah.
And then in the Northeast, you've got different strains of Lyme and the Powassan virus, which is very deadly. There's no treatment, no cure for that. That's really kind of starting to pick up. So, it's not just Lyme disease that you get from a tick bite. You can get 20 other diseases, and those diseases can be just as debilitating as Lyme is too. And depending on your region where you get it, it's just, a black hole of what you might be dealing with.
When I was diagnosed with celiac disease, I felt like I was in a black hole. The gastroenterologist, very nice fella, looked at me and he said, "Oh, it's kind of like diabetes. You'll be fine," and walked out of the room.
Oh my gosh.
Leaving me with nothing.
Oh my gosh.
This is 15 years ago, because almost 16 years ago, I was diagnosed right after I gave birth to my daughter. And so I ended up doing advocacy, learning about celiac disease, trying to weigh out the truths and the misnomers and all of that stuff. And it's really fascinating to me in a time period that we can send this little tiny itty bitty microchip into your mouth, into your intestines to check to make sure you don't have any polyps or anything like that. And you expel it and they do the radiography or whatever it is. And yet we can't get the right damn testing.
I know.
I can't. I just.
I know. So much doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah, no. It's actually quite scary, especially, I love hiking and camping.
Mm-hmm.
That's just my go-to Zen space.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's really quite frightening because
Yeah.
you don't know what you're going to bring back.
No, and
It's like,
Florida's quite endemic with Lyme disease too, which is surprising, but they just love all that moisture and kind of, green, wet weather that you guys have down there. So
yeah,
it's
swamp
just like,
thing.
yeah, it's where they thrive. So, and there was even just a recent report here in California, particularly Northern California and the Central Coast, that the beaches are full of ticks that have Lyme disease. And it's mostly like the shrubs and the grass
Yeah,
kind
yeah.
of on the edges, which is kind of a big issue up in the Hamptons as well. But yeah, I mean, you brush up against a grass on your way down to the beach, and they're tiny. They're like the size of a poppy seed. And then they like to go feed on your scalp or your armpits where, you're like, is that a hair or is that a tick? I don't know, you barely see them if you're lucky to even notice it.
So what would you advise somebody if they're starting to feel kind of chronically achy and flu-y, but not
mm-hmm.
really fevery, which is what
Mm-hmm.
I understand, like the beginning.
Yeah, so it's interesting. In the beginning, most of the tests on the market are antibody tests. There is one lab, IGeneX, that now has an early detection test. So if you recently spent time outdoors, even if you didn't, even if you're like, it's the summer and you have this like weird flu that's kind of coming and going, that's pretty classic Lyme. And so doing an early detection test with IGeneX lab, I highly recommend. It takes your body about 30 days to start making antibodies, which is where some of the other tests can come in. So if you're more kind of chronic, you've had this going on for a while, you don't know what's going on, you're starting to have weird symptoms kind of creep in, I highly recommend seeing a Lyme literate doctor. Not just because they're going to say, oh, you have Lyme for sure, but at least they'll know the right testing to do to see if you do have Lyme or a co-infection or are dealing with another chronic condition. I feel like Lyme literate doctors are very well versed in chronic illness, mystery illness, kind of digging in deep and finding the root cause for things. So I always recommend having that as a second opinion to whatever other doctors you're going to, just to see if there's anything else there that they can uncover for you.
Well, and I also think they were probably really well versed as to treatment. Back in the old
Exactly.
days, I remember Lyme disease. If you didn't catch it in the first 2 weeks, you were permanently and could be permanently disabled.
Exactly. I mean, that's still
Um,
the case, unfortunately. If you don't catch it early and do the right amount of antibiotics, that's another thing. A lot of these doctors are like, oh, you had the rash. You're lucky to even get the rash and catch it. They're like, here's 10 days of antibiotics, and that's not enough. And
no.
I've met so many people that were like, oh, I got bit. I took the 10 days, and here I am 3 years later, and I can't drive. I can't think. And like their fingers are twitching because they didn't do enough treatment. So it's really
Well,
about seeing the right doctors.
seeing the right doctors for sure and making sure that they know, because even with a large amount of antibiotics, which is what it
Mm-hmm.
takes to kill this damn thing in
Mm-hmm.
your body, you run risks of diverticulitis and other complications from just
Other
the antibiotic.
issues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, young lady, we only have a couple of minutes left. What else are you going to gift us with? This was so exciting. I love talking to a like-minded individual.
Oh gosh, I don't know. What else can I gift you guys with? What other pressing question do you have for me?
What are the pressing questions?
All
Gosh, what is your favorite thing? Okay, this is a tough one, especially for a
right.
celiac. What is the one thing that you absolutely miss that you can't wait for them to create that's gluten-free?
Baklava. Like,
Oh, I knew you were my
love
sister from another
baklava.
mister.
Like feel anything with phyllo dough, like spanakopita, like a nice gluten-free phyllo dough. There's one on the market, but it has guar gum, which I'm super sensitive to.
Mhm.
So I'm like, oh, it's like pretty much like I can't have it anyways. But if someone can come up with like a flaky gluten-free phyllo that we can make baklava and spanakopita with, I'll be a happy girl.
I'll be right over. Those are my top two. My number one is actually croissants, but it's still
Oh
along that
yeah.
same flaky light.
There's some good gluten-free croissants out there now.
Are they in the
Mariposa,
U.S.?
yeah, Mariposa Bakery has some in San Francisco. No Glue in New York City does a pretty good one, and Bread Block here in LA makes a pretty nice flaky one too. So
Do they
those I feel like there's some hope with those, but that
do they
thin,
Uber?
do they what?
Do they
Do they
Uber,
Uber?
DoorDash?
They might ship. I think Mariposa does ship, actually. They do ship nationwide, so check those out.
Happy Mother's Day to me. Woohoo! Erika, it's been a blast, and thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Don't be a stranger. Give us your website again so that people can reach out to you.
Absolutely. It's thetrailtohealth.com.
Yay! So enjoy your sunny side of life.
Thank you.
You know, keep traveling. Keep telling us what's going on. I can't wait to
Absolutely.
delve into your blog. It was really nice to meet you.
It was great meeting you too. Take care.
Bye, sweetheart. Take care.
Bye.
You're watching Living and Thriving with Rustie. I'm Rustie, and I get to do this. This is so much fun. I don't even know if you guys understand how cool it is to finally meet people who are like-minded. Like, she's a celiac, I'm a celiac, I have fibromyalgia, she's got Lyme disease. You know, they both suck. But we get to eat like queens anywhere in the world, as long as you're smart about it. And you ask a lot of questions, and you really have to advocate for yourself. And I think Erika really illustrated how important it is to be knowledgeable about what's going on with your body. The aches, the pains, they're not always just in your head. Sometimes they're actually real. And you have to be able to advocate for yourself, because doctors, they are not limitless. They stuff a whole bunch of information in their head, but there's still tons of information to stuff, and there's just not enough room in that headspace. So forgive your doctors for not being perfect and absolutely godlike and knowledgeable, even though some of them think they are, but we'll forgive that. Advocate for yourself, ask for the right testing. And like she said, there are certain tests that work and certain tests that don't. But when you're hiking, make sure you do a head to toe, connect the dot kind of thing. You know, I have a lot of moles. I need to make sure they're not moving. That's all. Just simple, but still, you can still live. Know that you're loved. Know that you're beautiful. Do something kind for yourself. Do something kind for somebody else. You know, I like to send out random thank you cards or random birthday cards, even though it's not the person's birthday, but I'm sure I missed one sometime. And people like that sort of thing. Try it. It's lovely and people enjoy it. Until next time.